This evening we will discuss the Abolitionist Movement, and next week we will devote ourselves to the Civil War, particularly an examination of how one defines the Civil War and the origins of the Civil War. I offered you some suggestions as to readings in the Abolitionist Movement last time. On the Civil War, sometime you should make a project of reading the 4 volumes of Carl Sandburg's life of Lincoln during the Civil War. It's actually a 6-volume work, but his first 2 volumes are not equal to the last 4. And the last 4 deal volume by volume with year by year of the 4 years of the war. Sandburg, of course, wrote like an angel. In the Civil War, he had a tremendous epic to tell. I don't know how many times I've read it, but I cannot read the 4th volume without weeping like a baby. So if you have time to read only one of the 4 volumes, read the 4th volume. The volumes have numerous detailed errors which are of no significance to normal people. They bother me, but they're really inconsequential. I mean, if one is professionally a historian, he notices these things, but they're really not very important. It's a great work that Sandburg did. I offered an analysis of the Civil War in a little booklet that was separately published in 1961. And the essence of that is in the book edited by our daughter, Bettina. This is called The Unfolding Drama. This dramatic title is, of course, Bettina's. The Unfolding Drama, edited by Herbert Aptheker. Copies are here, and there is a chapter there on the Civil War. I now ask you with me to turn to the Abolitionist Movement, which is the second great revolutionary movement in the history of the United States. And that's the first central fact about it. It is a revolutionary movement. That's the main truth. It is therefore that aspect of the movement which is omitted in the literature. The literature treats this, if it is favorable, as a reform movement, a kind of do-good movement. Generally, it treats it as a white reform movement. There is a considerable hostile literature which treats the abolitionist movement as an unfortunate conglomeration of mischievous fanatics. Both, however, treat the movement as a reformist one, which misses the whole point. Simply wrong. It is not a reformist movement. It's not another one of the reform movements of the pre-Civil War 19th century, of which many abounded. It is a revolutionary movement. What is a revolutionary movement? A revolutionary movement is a social movement which seeks the transformation of the property relationships characterizing the society, and seeks the transformation of those property relationships upon which is based the power of the ruling class. A movement which seeks to qualitatively change that property relationship, the possession of which determines the nature of the ruling class, is a revolutionary movement. This is precisely what the abolitionist movement sought to do, which is why it faced the fate of a revolutionary movement. That is to say, its partisans faced vituperation, physical violence, slander, boycott, unemployment, jail, martyrdom. How and why it eventuated in triumph, we will see. Not only today, but next week. Remember then, it is a revolutionary movement which seeks what? It seeks the immediate emancipation of the slaves. That is to say, it seeks the confiscation of that property, the ownership of which defined the slaveholding class. That's why it's called the slaveholding class. It's not called the class of molasses, magnolia, and moonlight. And the society is a slave society, a slaveholding society, because that property relationship characterized the society. And the owners of the slaves, and I'll give you figures in a few minutes, the owners of the slaves not only ruled the South, in which they were, of course, absolutely predominant in terms of power, social, economic, political, and ideological power, but they also ruled less predominantly, but effectively, the nation as a whole, certainly up to 1850. Not without challenge, but the challenge was offered to those in power, and they were in power. What do I mean in power? I mean, first of all, the slaveholding class, the plantation slaveholding oligarchy, of whom there weren't more than 200,000 people at the height in 1860, possessed approximately 4 million slaves in 1860, at which time an average field hand was evaluated at approximately $1,000. For purposes of arithmetic, we'll make it $1,000. $1,000 each slave, 4 million slaves, that's $4 billion. That's $1860, not $1986. I don't know how to translate it into 1980 money. Probably something like 80 or $100 billion. This tightly vested, intermarried, ruthless, mature, confident, ruling class possessed not only $4 billion in the evaluation of the workers whom they enslaved, but they possessed all the best land, millions of acres of the best land, all the cotton and sugar and rice and hemp and tobacco and gold and lumber and molasses, etc., produced, which in the course of any year, the crops of which produced in any year were billions of dollars. The evaluation of the land, billions of dollars. So that you had something approximating 40 or 50 billion dollars in the absolute possession of this class of perhaps 250,000 people. There was no property owning class in the United States that came close to this class. Not the beginning of the industrial bourgeoisie, not the mercantile bourgeoisie, not the free soil farm owners and so on, none of them. You can put them all together and they begin to approach the colossal wealth of this handful of oligarchic plantation owners. So on the basis of this enormous wealth that they controlled both political parties, the Democratic and the Whig Party. Of course they had a preferred party. It was the Democratic usually, but both parties either celebrated slavery or at least acquiesced in it throughout the course of their existence. They don't begin to break up until the 50s, for reasons we'll see next week. Dominated both parties. The President of the United States was usually a slave owner. If he wasn't a slave owner, he was more akin to the slave-owning class than the slave owner. The majority of the Supreme Court were normally slave owners. The slave-owning class controlled Congress. The slave-owning class controlled the press, controlled all religions. No religion offered a serious test to the slave-owning class except the Quakers, who represented a fractional group, and the black church, who represented the black church. But the great denominations, with no exceptions as denominations, there were of course exceptions among ministers, usually enthusiastically endorsed slavery, at least acquiesced in it. All the leading publishers, all the leading universities, no abolitionists could get a job teaching in a university. So that class, which represents the greatest wealth, political power, judicial power, control of Congress, control of foreign policy, control of the press, control of the media, control of education, control of the church, if that's not the ruling class, I'm J. Edgar Hoover. And of course, out of 10,000 history textbooks, I doubt that you'll find more than 2 who even pose the question which is the ruling class. But you're not allowed to use such words, ruling class. It's forbidden. But if you do not ask such a question, how can you examine American history or any other history, except for some kindergarten? Of course, the fundamental thing is class division, ownership of property, control of the political parties, control of the press, and so on and so forth. Of course this is fundamental. Now, I reiterate that the dominating power of all these evidences of control was the slave-holding class, based upon the ownership of the slave property. And it is precisely that property which the abolitionists say must be abolished. We must confiscate it without any compensation to the slave owners. Now that demand, and that demand alone, was a revolutionary demand in pre-Civil War United States. Only that was. And that is precisely the main demand of the abolitionist movement. As an organized fist in the American Anti-Slavery Society formed at the end of 1832, they had 2 other demands. I reiterate the first one: abolish slavery at once without compensation to the owners. The second was to struggle against racism, a demand also ignored in the literature. There is, by the way, no book on the history of anti-racism. If I live long enough, I'll write several books on it, one of the things I'm doing. But there is no book. It is a scandal. Very few articles. But that doesn't mean there isn't a history of anti-racism. There is such a history. There is no literature. There is a history. And the second demand in the Constitution of the American Anti-Slavery Society was to struggle against racism in its manifestations. Jim Crow, discrimination, education, so on and so forth. The third was to assist the free colored population, particularly in the North, of whom in 1860 there were 250,000. They meant to assist them practically, give them jobs, give them legal help, and so on and so forth. These are the 3 components of the Constitution of the American Anti-Slavery Society. The main one, of course, is end slavery. Now, that defines the movement. How do we place it chronologically? It is always somewhat arbitrary to chronologically confine a great socioeconomic movement, which has, of course, profound roots. And there are seeds of anti-slavery and emancipationism go back to before the Revolution. But they do not constitute an abolitionist movement such as I have defined for you. And one can see the beginning of it rather clearly, unlike most historical phenomena of this dimension. It dates from the 1820s, the second half of the 1820s. This is a period of the beginning of very significant socioeconomic qualitative transformation in the life of the country, especially the North. A great spurt comes with the War of 1812, increased manufacturing, building of turnpikes, roads, canals, bridges, symbolize 1825, the completion of the Great Erie Canal. It transforms the whole Northeast and what was then called the West. The beginning of a very significant migration to the United States from at this period West and Northern Europe. Hundreds of thousands. Workers all up. Workers all up. And so the beginning of a significant urban population and the beginning of a significant industrial population, as well as mercantile, artisans, mechanics, workers, and groups of workers. And a pre-Civil War industrial bourgeoisie, which is, of course, relatively a progressive class. At the same time, a tremendous development in slavery and the numbers of slaves and the production of rice, of sugar, of cotton, and so on. Enormous growth. For technological and demographic reasons. And also movement. Movement into West Tennessee, Western Virginia, beginning of the movement to Alabama and Mississippi and so on. Colossal geographic areas with great soil. And so you begin to get a confrontation between the free labor system and the slave system. A rising militancy, a rising writhing of the slave population. And for these reasons, internationally, you get the growth of an anti-slavery sentiment, an anti-slavery literature, and the beginning of an anti-slavery movement international. Of course, the first tremendous blow which put slavery in the middle of the world stage is the unique revolution of the Haitian people, beginning in 1791 against a Francan revolution, and continuing for 14 terribly bloody years, and finally France, Napoleon giving up, and the recognition of the independence of this Republic of Haiti out of the slave rebellion, which put the fear of God into the slaveholding class throughout the world, including the United States, with refugees fleeing and so on and so forth. Front page stories for years. And the development of the anti-slave trade movement. Those who want some details as to the sources of this will read the book by Eric Williams called Capitalism and Slavery, published around 1939. Mr. Williams later became the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago. I knew him quite well when he was a teacher at Howard. He's dead now. But it's a good book. The development of a significant, powerful movement against the African slave trade, Wilberforce, Clarkson, and so on, the conquest of Parliament. It's related to the development of India and so on. And from that, the development of a movement to abolish slavery in the British colonies, particularly in the British West Indies, and the appearance of an emancipation abolitionist movement in England in the early 20s. And the publications of this literature, the publication of this movement in English, soon reaches the shores of the United States and is attacking slavery. And here is slavery. And by 1832, the movement succeeds, and slavery is abolished in the British West Indies. A little later in the French West Indies, a little earlier in Mexico, 1829 in Mexico. So you have this international ferment as the 19th century develops. and especially with the 1820s. And here in the United States, 1827, the appearance of the first black-owned and black-edited newspaper, Freedom's Journal, edited by two young black men, published in New York. Snippets of which are in the first volume of my documentary history. It's 1827. Early in 1829, the appearance of a remarkable pamphlet called the Ethiopian Manifesto. The title is amazing. The Ethiopian Manifesto, by a black man who is quite mysterious, Robert Alexander Young. And selections from that are in my documentary. As far as I know, there's only one existing pamphlet, which I found, 40 years ago. But it projects what Jews call a golem, an indestructible liberator, who is monumental in size and immortal, and comes out of what island do you think? Out of Grenada. And appears and leads a great war of liberation. 1829, February, that's the flu pamphlet. And of course, later in 1829, one of the great pamphlets in human history, Walker's Appeal to the Colored Citizens of the World. What do you think of that title? Appeal to the Colored Citizens of the World. Does each word mean something to you? Colored citizens. Citizens, they're citizens nowhere. That's hated. And citizens, then, men comrades. In the same range. This is the French Revolutionary period. Citizen so-and-so. Citizen so. Men comrades. It's the meaning of it. Use of it. Colored citizens of the world. Imagine, of the world. Pan-Africanism doesn't appear through the genius of Du Bois until 1900. It was 1829, second-class old clothes dealer, black man, come out of North Carolina, 1829, publishes this thing by himself, illustrates it by himself, and it has every argument the Abolitionist Movement ever had. Every argument. I found one of the three extant copies in Richmond 50 years ago, God knows how long ago. When I found it, I said I was going to reprint it someday, and I did. It was a Life of Walker. The book is called One Continual Cry. I don't know whether it's in print or not, certainly in libraries. One Continual Cry. You'll find the life of this amazing man who died in 1830 after the pamphlet ran 3 editions. His death is mysterious. By the way, his son is the first black member of the state legislature of Massachusetts, Edward G. Walker. That's his son. After the Civil War. This pamphlet is a call for rebellion. We talk about the theology of liberation. That's what the pamphlet is. The pamphlet is an expression of the theology of liberation. We translate it into Spanish and publish it in Nicaragua, and nobody would notice the difference. Anybody thinks theology of liberation is new in statement. It's as old as enslavement. In fact, original Christianity was a theology of liberation, of course. Religion of slaves. That pamphlet was widely distributed, although only 3 exist now. It was burned. Special sessions of the Southern legislatures were called to consider this an outstanding pamphlet. It was being distributed by 3 black people. At least 2 white people that I know of, a sailor and a printer, were driven out of the South for distributing it. There have been more. Governors called special sessions. The South went crazy with this pamphlet. Black man calling for rebellion in a pamphlet being found in Alabama and Georgia. Jesus Christ. That's 1829. 1830 is formed what's called the Negro Convention movement, where the free black population begins to organize itself and then hold national conventions, first one in Philadelphia. And their main concern is the betterment of their condition and the elimination of slavery. One of their meetings was attended by the young William Lloyd Garrison, who up to this point had been a colonizationist. It was a black meeting, but they allowed white people in, being more or less civilized. Garrison had the sense to sit and listen. He came out, he was an abolitionist. He said so. He said that that meeting changed him from a colonizationist to an abolitionist. It's at this time that he participates with the great Benjamin Lundy out of Tennessee in issuing an emancipationist newspaper called The Genius of Universal Emancipation. He attacks a slave owner, a slave trader. He's charged with libel. He's convicted. He goes to prison. He refuses to pay his fine. He sits in prison. It's a great education, as Eugene Debs told us. But Arthur Tappan, who was very sympathetic to the anti-slavery movement, and very unique in that movement because he was rich, almost none of them was rich, paid his fine. And he got out. He started the Liberated, January 1831, and stayed with it until the end of December 1865. Wrote every issue, had a desperate appeal for funds. If we don't get money, there won't be a next issue. Sounds familiar to anybody who reads the People's World? It's true in the People's World, it's true in the Liberated. Just as the People's World has existed, 45 years? This revolutionary newspaper, which is exciting reading, it's in any library, it's been reprinted, the Liberator, can't do better than to read that. Marvelous. I'll tell you a little story. When I was doing a lot of research in the library, I had this thing, New York Public Library, I had it on reserve. You know, so you don't have to put a slip in every morning for it. I had it on reserve. I got there when the library opened, and I went to the place where they kept the books that were on reserve. And there was a young woman in a cage behind there reading a book, serving the public, and I went up to her in the rude and clumsy way of a New Yorker who's always in a hurry. And I said to her, "The Liberator." She looked up and she said, "Are you really? God, I've been waiting for you." This was an early lesson in being polite. All right. By that time, the movement is launched. So that's why I put it in the 1820s. Now, I want to make the point that it was a movement. This is also not discernible in most of the literature. In most of the literature, it's something that just appears and sort of hangs around. I don't know what the hell it is. It isn't defined in any way. Just there it is. But of course it's a movement. It's a revolutionary movement, which means what? Which means it's organized. It's an organized movement with a constitution, with officers, with publications, with dues, with meetings until you're behind it gets boiled. I mean, meetings after meetings after meetings. You folks know about meetings? Well, they had meetings. And what shall we do? And why should we do that? And why shouldn't we do this? And arguments and so on. The movement. What's the best idea? What kind of a petition? Who's going to write the petition? Who's going to circulate the petition? So on. All sound familiar, I hope? That's what it was. That's what it was. It was a movement dedicated to this revolutionary goal. It had a national organization, American Anti-Slavery, regional, New England Anti-Slavery, state, Massachusetts Anti-Slavery, Boston Anti-Slavery, Boston Female Anti-Slavery, Boston Juvenile Anti-Slavery, and so on and so forth. Now, since it's a revolutionary movement, it's a black-white movement. Cannot have a revolutionary movement, cannot have a democratic movement in the United States if it is not a black-white movement. You cannot have a revolutionary movement in Israel if it's not an Arab-Jewish movement. If it isn't, there's something rotten in it. Same is true here. And this is a black-white movement. We'll have more to say about black people in the movement. But it's a black-white movement. It's a male-female movement. It's the first great male-female social reorganization movement, certainly in the history of the United States. I can say that with confidence. I don't want to say the history of the world. Certainly the history of the United States. And out of this great participation by women in the liberation from property status, women participating and in the forefront in this movement, comes the women's movement. To give you some idea of what's involved here, the first female anti-slavery society, 1833, which meets in Philadelphia, about 40 women, courageous, meet, form the society. But these advanced, courageous, revolutionary women, there isn't one of them who dares chair the meeting. You got to get a man to chair the meeting. Well, what man is going to chair this meeting? What man is going to be an abolitionist to chair a meeting of women abolitionists gathered together? Where can you find such a hero? They found a black dentist named James McCrummell, who volunteered for this unbelievable task. That's his name, James McCrummell. Just doing that earns immortality. In Aptheker's class, anyway. James McCrummell. So it's male-female. It is also northern-southern. There's a very important participation by southern white people in the movement. Enormous numbers. Enormous, maybe it's said. Large numbers. Some of them outstanding. So-called president of the Underground Railroad, Levi Coffin in North Carolina. Has to leave the South, works in Indiana. The leading political figure in the abolitionist movement, James B. Birney, formerly a slave owner in Alabama, mayor of the city of Huntsville, Alabama. Moves away, becomes colonizationist, becomes an anti-slavery figure, becomes an abolitionist, has to leave. And goes into Ohio, Indiana, and so on. Becomes a leader of the movement. Sarah Grimke and Angelina Grimke, the two unbelievable women of South Carolina. Their father was a member of the Supreme Court of South Carolina, most distinguished family. Couldn't stand it. Couldn't stand the slave society. Went to Philadelphia, joined the Quakers, and then devoted themselves at the risk of their lives to this movement. And no one was more effective than the Grimke sisters. There's a fine book by Gerda Lerner on the Grimke sisters, which you may want to read, certainly to know it. First name is Gerda. He was a refugee from fascism in Austria, came here just before World War II. She's living, she's a professor in Wisconsin. So there are many Southerners who are part of it and who offer effective testimony as Southern whites. You can see that. It is a definite element in the movement. The movement is also international. I've already called to your attention the international quality. It's in France, it's in Germany, it's especially in Great Britain. It's very strong in Ireland, very strong in Ireland. By the way, there is a tradition in black history of black Irish unity. That deserves a book. The great Daniel O'Connell was one of the leaders of the anti-slavery movement. Douglas spent a great deal of time in Ireland. Garvey, when he was still a revolutionary, was very much attracted to the Irish revolutionary movement. Contrary to the stereotype of Irish as anti-black and so on. There is that too, but there is the other quality. So it is an international movement. It's very important, especially the British component. Why did this revolutionary movement grow? Why did this revolutionary movement grow? That's, of course, the key question. Don't we have an interest in that question in this room? How the hell do you make a revolutionary movement grow? Well, these earlier communists found a way. Maybe we can learn something. First of all, they stayed with it. There's got to be a kernel. I mean, K-E-R-N-E-L. I only made majors, so I don't care about kernels. But there's got to be a kernel. You have to have people in there. were going to stay come hell or high water. And there were such people. There was a movement. There was a core. There was a vanguard. It grew because of socioeconomic transformation, and we'll look at that next time in terms of the root of the Civil War. That is, other classes developed, the laboring class, the bourgeoisie, and so on, whose interests were directly contrary to that of the slave owning class. And the atmosphere in the country began to change. It didn't become abolitionist, but it became anti-slavery, and especially anti-slave expansion. And as that atmosphere changed, the hostility to the abolitionists lessened. Very much like the hostility to the communists lessened in World War II. Especially if you were in the American Army at the back of the boat. You were rooting for the Red Army. My God, where the hell are they this morning? How come they only made 10 miles? It seems they just took Warsaw. Anyone see them? Everybody loved the communists. Everybody. Mrs. Roosevelt, a handful of senators, people were tripping over themselves, sending blankets to the Red Army. They didn't send much else. An analogous change appeared here in this country, so that the abolitionists became less and less fanatics, and maybe they're saying something worth listening to. That socioeconomic demographic change and the increase of the labor movement helped. You also get a great deal of help very often in a revolutionary movement from the madness of reaction. You can usually depend upon them to be as stupid as Reagan and to say wrong things and do wrong things, outrageous things, full of lies, full of distortion. For instance, in this case, the slave owners began to say that all workers should be slaves. But that's the solution of the class problem. They said that. That solves the class struggle. We don't have a class struggle. Labor is in our pocket with our cash. That's our labor. That's it. You have a problem, sell them. That's all. Sell them. Hang them. We're going to count our slaves under the monument in Bunker Hill, said the senator from Georgia, later vice president of the Confederacy. The leading writer of social science, excuse the expression, in the South, George Jew. Sociology for the South. Cannibals all. That's the subtitle. Cannibals all. What do you think of that? Frank, eh? Calhoun is the solution of the class struggle. So you can imagine what that did when they reprinted that in the North. That these bastards say that they ought to buy and sell us. Put us up at all. Trade our children in. We're not talking about these black people, whoever the hell they are down in Mississippi. They're talking about us here in Troy, in Rochester, in Buffalo. These bastards are crazy. That began to spread. That's what I mean, you see. And then, of course, the policy of the slave owners, make war on Mexico. Where the hell is Mexico? Want to take Texas. What the hell do I know about Texas? I want to send my son down to Texas, wherever the hell that is, to fight for Texas. I don't want Texas. I want them helping me plant my crops. And then when they take Texas, they're going to make slave states out of it. And then these maniacs announced somewhere in Ostend, wherever the hell Ostend is in Belgium, the three ambassadors of the United States to Spain, England, and France get together and announced in 1854 that we ought to take Cuba. And if Spain won't sell Cuba, to be sensible and sell us Cuba, go in there and take it. These goddamn maniacs, these are crazy people. They send a naval expedition to the Amazon, they explore the Amazon, they're going to take Brazil. The hell with Portugal. Portugal owns it, the hell with Portugal. We're going to take it. They don't like anti-slavery pamphlets. You send it through the mail, they burn the mail. They don't like anti-slavery petitions. They ban petitions in the Congress of the United States. We don't have freedom of petition. We don't have freedom of speech. They're making slaves of us right now. They want to capture their goddamn fugitive slaves. Let them capture them in Louisiana or in Alabama. But they make a law that says in Massachusetts, I have to help them catch their slaves. And if I don't do that, it's a year in jail for me. By the way, to anticipate, they threw that press in the river. And he moved to Alton. They threw a third press in the river. And he got a fourth press. And the group of comrades and him guarded it with a rifle. And the death squads came, like in Nicaragua, and surrounded the house and put it on fire. And when they came out of the burning place, they shot him and killed Elijah Lovejoy dead in 1847. An editor shot dead for defending the fourth press. 3 they thrown in the river. Here he is. He sends a letter to the citizens of St. Louis now. It's only the second press. I do therefore, as an American citizen and a Christian patriot, and in the name of liberty and law and religion, solemnly protest against all these attempts, howsoever or by whomsoever made, to frown down the liberty of the press and forbid the free expression of opinion. Under a deep sense of my obligations to my country, my church, and my God, I declare it to be my fixed purpose to submit to no such dictation, and I am fully prepared to abide the consequences. I have appealed to the Constitution and laws of my country. If they fail to protect me, I appeal to God, and with him I cheerfully rest my case. And they shot him dead and made an abolitionist of Wendell Phillips. So you can generally depend on reaction. It's another source of the growth. But you had to have an Elijah Lovejoy stand with his rifle and guard his press and give his life. It cannot be overemphasized in this effort to understand the growth of this movement, the decisive character of the participation of black people. They are, after all, the slaves. And what is their participation? First of all, their uprisings. The whole propaganda of slavery held that they were a special people. They were not really people. To show you they're not really people, they love slavery. They just love it. When we put them in chains, they're so happy, they're delirious. They're so happy and so delirious that they keep on rebelling. Gabriel the blacksmith, 6'2", 22 years old. Thousands join him. We see the free Negro in Charleston, 50 years old. Thousands join him. Nat Turner, 31 years old, the black preacher. Hundreds join him and make as much slaughter as they can until they are caught. And it takes a month before he's caught. He hides in a hole. He has a little meat, and the man is out hunting with his dog, and the dog smells the meat, and they uncover John Brown. And they torment him, and they throw him in prison. All his comrades have been hung. His wife has been flayed trying to get her to confess. Where is he? Where is he? Where is he? And when she's half dead, they sell her south. And they convict him, and they put him in prison. And he's chained to the wall in Richmond. One hand chained to the wall. He's lying on a cot. And the court-appointed clerk comes in to get a confession from him. They want a confession from him. They want him to say what he did was wrong. Confess. They're mad to get a confession out of this black rebel. Tomorrow you hang, Matt. All your comrades have hanged. Your wife is gone. You're gone. Do you not now admit you are deluded? That you followed a false God? That you made more than a mistake, it was a crime. Confess your sin. You are going to hang tomorrow. And the court clerk tells us what Nat Turner did. He stood up from the cot. One arm chained to the wall, the other arm he raised, and he formed a cross in the cell block. And he said, I tell you, I do not feel guilty. I am not guilty. Further, was not Christ crucified, he says? Was not Christ crucified? And the court clerk writes everything down. The calls it the Confessions of Nat Turner. Some Confessions. And William Styron spits on Nat Turner and makes millions of dollars. And that's supposed to be a great book. Goddamn bastard. Someday, someone is going to put this story on a play, and on boards. And we're going to have an audience in the United States developed so they can understand it. They're going to tear down the theater. It is the single most dramatic moment in the history of the United States. This little black man saying to the white appointed reporter, "Was not Christ crucified?" And the jerk is writing everything down. He doesn't know what the hell he's writing down. This is what's called in American history books the crazy Negro Nat Turner. And insurrection after insurrection on ships, on the Creole, on the Amistad. The Amistad becomes a famous case. Involving international law, John Quincy Adams becomes the leading attorney pleading for the slave rebels. This makes headlines. All these things make headlines all the time. They're talking about the contented slaves. Here they are, showing you their contentment. And then, of course, the Underground Railroad, the thousands. Probably 60,000 getting away between 1830 and 1860. We don't know exactly. About 60,000 making it. 2 or 3 failed for everyone who made it. And others didn't go north. They went into the swamps, the great Maroon movement. Fugitive slaves, outlying slaves in the swamps. Some went to the British West Indies. Some went to Mexico. Tens of thousands flee. Everyone fleeing, it's a loss of $1,000 in capital. In great dramatic cases there, Henry Brown, how does he free himself? Through this Underground Railroad, led by a black man of Philadelphia, William Still. It's all arranged secretly. He puts himself in a box sent by Adams Express, which is the predecessor to the American Express Company. Puts himself in a box and has himself shipped from Richmond to Philadelphia. It took about 40 hours. He's in the box with holes and a little gourd of water in there. They throw him around. And he comes to the office of William Still. And there's a crowd. About 7 or 8 people around. They have a signal, and they knock on the box. Is he living? And there's an answer from the box. He's alive. And they open the box. And out steps Henry Fox Brown, as he's known from there on. Henry Fox Brown, and speaks throughout the country. Black people speak in churches, raising money to buy their mother. The master has made a deal. Give me $300 in gold. I'll sell you your mother. I'll sell you the baby. I'll sell you your wife. Church is organized. A black man, a black woman comes and speaks. Not long. I'm from Alabama. My girl is 12. She's a slave. The man says, if I raise $450 and send it there, I can have her back. Otherwise, God knows what will happen to her. They passed a hat. You think people gave a nickel or a dime or a quarter? You think there was anybody who didn't give money? Only a black person could do that. And then, of course, like all people, you have a genius. Every once in a while, a genius. Black people produce their share of geniuses. The greatest figure of the 19th century is a black man, Frederick Douglass. He flees when he's 21 years old, 1837. Comes north, 1841. He's at an abolitionist meeting, gets up, moves to speaks, and they see what they've got. He, by the way, he looks just like Karl Marx. Marx is quite dark, you know. They call Marx the Moor. And Douglass was not black. A little darker than Marx. With the same kind of a beard and an enormous head. Taller than Marx. He was about 6'1", Douglass. Enormous figure. When he'd get up and speak, he'd start out by saying, in a voice like Robeson, he'd start out by saying, "Am I a man?" Which, after all, was the big question. He said, am I a man? Captain Reinders, who was the head of Tammany Hall, and a corrupt monster. Once tells us he was at a meeting. He had planned to break up the meeting. And Douglas was there. And Douglas stood up and began, am I a man? And Reinders said, God damn, he's a man. Now, Douglas went all over the country in the north and went to France and Germany and England and Ireland. By the way, in Germany, he bought a bust of Ludwig Feuerbach. I wish I knew why. The great philosopher who so much influenced Marx and begins the whole concept of materialism for 19th century German philosophy. And he brought the bust back. It is now in the foyer of his home in Anacostia Heights in District of Columbia. The bust of Feuerbach. And Douglas wrote as a dialectician. Brilliant. Dialectics. As far as I know, he never met Marx, although he might have. He was in England at the same time. Widely publicized. But he read Marx, there's no question about that. Because Marx wrote a regular column for the New York Tribune. And everybody read the New York Tribune. There was no question that he read Marx. And it is quite likely that Marx read Douglas, although I have no proof of that. So you have these giants, and you have rescue cases. The Jerry case in Syracuse, Anthony Burns in Boston, and so on. The Oberlin Wellington rescue case. Usually led by black people who physically rescued the fugitives. Sometimes killing a U.S. Marshal. Christiana, 1851, killed a U.S. Marshal. Tried for treason, defended by Thaddeus Stevens before an all-white jury, and every one of them acquitted. That's the beginning of the end. That's 1852. Well, that's the case. I always prepare too much. But I want to read you something here. The 21 men who go with Brown. 5 are black. The others are white. 19 of them are below 30 years of age. The old man's 59. There's no generation gap. They rendezvous in a farmhouse in Maryland. And women are with them, women in the Abolitionist Movement, to make it look like farmers. Now, hang up clothing and so on to avoid suspicion. Several of the women are married to the men, some of them are not married to the men. So they're part of the effort. But when they go to fight with pikes and with rifles, the men go, just before dawn. One of the black men with him was John Copeland, a fugitive slave who got to Ohio and lived in Ohio. He joined Brown. He sentenced to hang with Brown. He is hanged. He's hanged on December 16, 1859. He wrote some letters to his family. Here's a letter written December 10, 1859 to his brother. By the way, on his way to execution, the Baltimore Sun reported that Gallows cried, "If I am dying for freedom, I could not die for a better cause. Hang me now, I'd rather die than be a slave." And they hung him. Dear brother, it was a sense of the wrongs which we have suffered that prompted the noble but unfortunate Captain John Brown and his associates to attempt to give freedom to a small number at least of those who are now held by cruel and unjust laws and by no less cruel and unjust men. To this freedom we were entitled by every known principle of justice and humanity, and for the enjoyment of it God created us. And now, dear brother, could I die in a more noble cause? Could I die in a manner and for a cause which would induce true and honest men more to honor me, and the angels more readily to receive me to my happy home? I imagine that I hear you, and that all of you, mother, father, sisters, and brothers, say, no, there is not a cause for which we, with less sorrow, could see you die. Believe me when I tell you that though shut up in prison and under sentence of death, I have spent very happy hours here, and were it not that I know that the hearts of those to whom I am attached by the nearest and most enduring ties of blood relationship, yea, by the closest ties that God has instituted, will be filled with sorrow. I would almost as lief die now as at any time, for I feel that I am now fully prepared to meet my Maker, your brother John. I'm going to tell you a story that will lead you to understand John Brown, I hope. John Brown wanted Frederick Douglass to join him. They knew each other quite well. Brown wrote a letter to Douglass and said, I am at such and such a place, a farmhouse, such and such a place in Maryland, come join me. Douglass immediately prepared to go and join him. He was taking care of a fugitive slave. Douglass took care of many fugitive slaves. There was a 21-year-old man, fresh out of South Carolina, who had just gotten away, named Shields Green. He said to Shields, I have to go meet this man. You want to come with me? Yes, I'll go with you. So Frederick Douglass and Shields Green traveled incognito with security to this little farmhouse. And they kissed, Douglass and Brown. Douglass did not know what Brown wanted. Brown for the first time told him what his plan was and said, join me, join me. If we are together, we will win. Douglass said, no. Have you told the slaves you are coming? No, I did not tell them. If that is fatal, why should they join you? They do not know who you are. You may be a slave catcher. You come to them in the middle of the night, knock on the door and say, come with me. Who the hell are you? And you have picked a place with a few slaves. And you are attacking a federal armory. Why do you attack a federal armory? Which means that the U.S. government must come against you. Can you not pick some other place? But it is right at the mountain. It is right at the mountain, Frederick. And I will capture the town, and we will take the weapons in the armory and go to the mountain, and they will never catch us. And then slaves will come to the mountain top, and we will set up other bases, and we will deliver a blow to Africa, right in the heart of Africa. That's why God put the Appalachian Mountains where he put them. From Virginia to Alabama. That's the reason for the mountains. Will you come with me? No. I'm still young and have much to do. It is fatal. Do not go, Brown. Yeah, you are young, but I am old. Those days, 59 is old. I am an old man. And I have devoted my life to this plan. And what does it do? I live another 5 years. What for? I'm going to do this. Will you come with me? No, I will not come with you. And they were both in tears, and they kissed, and Douglass left. And as he left, you notice that Shields is standing behind. 21-year-old youngster, just made it out of slavery. First time he listened to a white man talk the way Brown did. And his idol, the black man Douglass, has rejected the white man and is going away. And Douglass says to Shields, Shields, are you coming with me or staying with the old man? And we have only one word from Shields Green. Shields Green says, I'm staying with the old man, which he did, and he was hanged. What do you think of that? Do you understand it? That's what John Brown was. He converted the prisoner to a warden. He made the warden an abolitionist. Mary Brown, his wife, had 13 children. She lost 2 in Kansas. She lost 2 in the raid. She was going to lose John. They loved each other passionately. Mary said, I'm coming to see you. He said, don't you do it. They'll endanger you. He was afraid of himself. He said, I'm coming to see you. And she did. And of course the governor was very gallant. John was a white woman. And the warden gave them some hours together. They were talking about preparations for the other children. If she didn't have a dime, how would she raise money? The Negro people will give you money. They lived in a Negro community in upstate New York. They will see that you do not starve. And where shall I bury you? Bury me there. Bury me in their cemetery. And have the Hutchinson singers, that was sort of the weavers of that period, have the Hutchinson singers sing some songs, Have Wendell Phillips make a speech, if he will, if he spare the time, and bury me there. And I will be buried in what they call a Negro cemetery, which is where he is buried, in North Elba. And when she took her leave, he broke down. That's what he was afraid of. She did not, but he did. And he wept like a baby. And when he went out that morning, they had a coffin in a wagon. He sat on the coffin. As he came out, he looked around and said, I never realized how beautiful the country is. They have 5,000 troops surrounding the gallows, including the man who shot Lincoln. He was there. The father of secession, Edmund Ruffin, was there to see that they hung him. They hung him not with hemp. They wanted to hang him with slave-made products, so they hung him with cotton. And the rope slipped. And he was quite strong. He hung on the rope 12 minutes before he died, before the doctor said he's dead. You can cut him down now. And when they took his body north, the North exploded. Church bells rang. Thoreau left making pencils in his pond and went to the nearest town to deliver one of the great speeches in the English language. If you don't know it, read it, Captain John Brown. Christ comes amongst you again, and you do not recognize him again. And again you crucify him. Victor Hugo, from his exile in Guernsey, sent an open letter to the people of America. Oh my God. Washington is murdering Spartacus. Now Brown was not crazy. Brown was a genius. Brown knew the temper of the North, and he was right. Because the abolitionist movement began as a moral suasion movement, moved into a political movement, and its final stage was militant abolitionism. And moral suasion is symbolized by Garrison, political by Douglas, and militancy by John Brown. John Brown is not an eccentric. If he is an eccentric, he is inconsequential. John Brown reflects the temper of the North at that time. And that's why it brought paroxysms to the slave owners in the South, because they saw how the North treated Brown. I want to give you a feeling of this finally with the poem, which was the favorite of W.E.B. Du Bois. Anytime he felt blue, he would hum this or sing it or recite it, the Battle Hymn of the Republic by Julia Ward Howe, who was a great abolitionist and a fighter for women's freedom, and the wife of the great Samuel Gridley Howe. She was in Washington, D.C. in December 1861 and witnessed the trampling of Union troops on their way south, singing John Brown's Body. Singing John Brown's Body 2 years to the day after they hung him. She was moved, and in one night she wrote the Battle Hymn of the Republic. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. He is trampling out the vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored. That's Steinbeck. He hath loosed the fateful lightning of his terrible swift sword. His truth is marching on. I have seen him in the watchfires of 100 circling camps. They have builded him an altar in the evening dews and damps. I can read his righteous sentence by the dim and flaring lamps. His day is marching on. He has sounded forth the trumpet that shall never call retreat. He is sifting out the hearts of men before his judgment seat. Oh, be swift, my soul, to answer him. Be jubilant, my feet. Our God is marching on. In the beauty of the lilies, Christ was born across the sea, with a glory in his bosom that transfigures you and me. As he died to make men holy, let us die to make men free, while God is marching on. Now the final scene in this great revolutionary movement is that in 1865, the United States government decides to raise the United States flag over Fort Sumter, which was the fort taken, you remember, when the Confederacy went to war. In April 1865, the United States flag was raised over Fort Sumter, South Carolina. And who was given the honor to raise the flag over Fort Sumter? Taken there in a U.S. battleship, who but William Lloyd Garrison? How about that? Isn't that marvelous? That's the abolitionist movement. Let's take a rest. I have a couple of things to tell you before taking questions.
Difference between abolition, being an abolitionist and being anti-slavery. You were making a distinction.
One could be theoretically opposed to slavery and not be an abolitionist. And many people affirm that, oh yes, we don't like slavery, but we don't like the abolitionists either. That is, they don't want to commit themselves, they're not revolutionary, they're not active, they're just well-intentioned at a distance. You know such people? That's who they were. Now, yes, a kind of liberal or reformist. Now, we are not to laugh at it in the sense that as the anti-slavery sentiment grew, and we will see this next week, it made the hostility to the abolitionists diminish and provided a more fertile soil for the propaganda of the abolitionists from anti-slavery to commitment to get rid of it. You say you're opposed to it in general, philosophically. Well, never mind in general, and let's never mind philosophically. Let's do something about it, you see. So in that sense, at the stage, that was the distinction I made. And you have anti-slavery long before you have an abolitionist movement. Benjamin Franklin is anti-slavery. Thomas Jefferson is anti-slavery in the sentiment, although he owns 200 slaves. Yes? Yes?
My question was, what was the role of the abolitionists, or what was their political program like during the Civil War? Like that was unclear from your presentation.
We will examine that in some detail next time, but just to anticipate, their role is a revolutionary role, that is a vanguard role, to insist that the Civil War in origin is a counter-revolutionary coup d'etat, an attempted counter-revolutionary coup d'etat by a desperate slave-holding oligarchy. That the strength of this counter-revolutionary class rests on slavery. That the source of the war is slavery. Therefore, the way to destroy counter-revolution is to destroy slavery. So the role of the abolitionists was to persuade a hesitant Lincoln administration that the thing to do was to adopt the abolitionist program. Why they're hesitant, we will see next time, and so on. But that's the role. It's a normal role of a revolutionary movement, to be out in front. And also, incidentally, to be right. Yes?
Could you speak a little bit about Karl Marx's role in England?
Yes, that's a very important point. Thank you very much. Karl Marx in England. We made the point that the struggle was an international one. And it's international from the viewpoint of ruling classes, too. The ruling classes of England and France, and by the way, the Vatican, was very sympathetic to the Confederacy. France and England had very reactionary governments, Napoleon the Little in France and Palmerston in England. And both desired the decrease in the significance of the United States of America. England in particular, which of course was then the premier power in the world, understood that the United States was the one significant challenge to the hegemony of Great Britain. And therefore anything that could divide the United States or reduce the significance of the United States was, the ruling class of England felt, to its benefit. Therefore they were very sympathetic to the Confederate movement and just fell short of recognizing it. The Confederate Navy was built by Great Britain, and Great Britain and France lent the Confederacy hundreds of millions of dollars. the Vatican, whose pope was a very reactionary pope, which is saying as much as English can say, sought to defend the Confederacy and came the closest of any significant power to recognizing the Confederacy as a power. The Pope addressed a letter to Jefferson Davis, President of the Confederate States of America, for example, which is just short of international recognition. Now, while this was true of some ruling elements in Western Europe, the working class of Western Europe, of course, was opposed to the Confederacy, especially when the Confederacy made clear that it was fighting for slavery, and especially when Lincoln made clear that the Union was fighting against slavery. This is one of the things that propelled the Emancipation Proclamation on the part of Lincoln, because our ambassador to London, Charles Francis Adams, told Lincoln that so long as you persist in saying that you have no interest in slavery, you will get no support from the masses in England, and the ruling class in England will go on with its pro-Confederate policy. But once you say that the flag of the Union is the flag of anti-slavery, then it is impossible for the working class of England and France and so on to support the Confederacy. No working class can support slavery, particularly the propaganda of these maniacs. So it's one of the things that hastens his decision to an Emancipation Proclamation. Now, the organizer of the organized working class in Western Europe was led by the First International, as we now call the First International, the International Workmen's Association. The General Secretary was Marx. And Marx is personally part of the organizing of the working class of Western Europe, particularly England and Germany, to oppose the Confederacy. He's able to do that on two scores. One, he is the General Secretary of this very influential organization. And second, he writes a regular column for the leading Republican newspaper, the New York Tribune, which everybody reads in the United States. So he exerts every bit of his energy, along with Engels and the First International, to assure working class support of Lincoln in opposition to the Confederacy. And this is quite important. We'll give you a little bit of it. This is written by Marx for the First International. By the way, it's in a book by Marx and Engels called Civil War in the United States, which was edited by Richard M. Maley. Engels, Marx, Lenin. It's edited by the late Herbert Aptheker. But you'll find it in libraries and Maley. Civil War in the United States by Marx and Engels. A remarkable collection of their writings, most of them in the New York Tribune, but some in continental newspapers and also in correspondence. Now, this is the First International after his re-election in November 1864, Lincoln's re-election. We congratulate the American people. This is Marx. Upon your re-election by a large majority. By the way, there was a super left in the United States, and in opposition to the First International, in opposition to Marx, which, for instance, in the United States, opposed the voting for Lincoln, who was just a railroad corporation lawyer. What the hell is the difference between Lincoln, who works for the railroads, and Jefferson Davis, who has a plantation? The hell with both of them. No real revolutionary could vote for either one of them. Therefore, you abstain from the election. Now, there were communist clubs, you know, in the United States. 1851 is one in Cleveland, for instance. 1854 is one in New York. A comrade laid out Central Park in New York, Joseph Weitemeyer, which may make you enjoy your next visit. He also was a colonel in the Civil War, Joseph Weitemeyer, in charge of the Union in St. Louis, and a friend of Marx. But there was this argument. Now, it was possible to resolve it somewhat because some genius said, well, let's see what is the Marxist position. Let's ask the old man. Marx will tell us what the Marxist position is, presumably. So somebody had the brains to ask Marx. This is when Marx, one of these days, he had a temper, by the way, when Marx denounced Marxism. He says, this is Marxism. They have a question as to whether I am opposed to slavery. In the name of Marx, they're asking, shall I vote? Is there some point to voting here? So Lincoln has issued the Emancipation Proclamation. Start tearing his hair and his beard and everything else. You know what to do with himself. But he answered these revolutionaries. So here he is now. He's writing about this Republican. He's elected president. You understand? Congratulate the American people. If resistance to the slave power was the reserved watchword of your first election, the triumphant war cry of your re-election is death to slavery. From the commencement of the titanic American strife, the working men of Europe felt instinctively that the Star-Spangled Banner carried the destiny of their class. The contest of the territories which opened the dire epoch was it not to decide whether the virgin soil of immense tracts should be wedded to the labor of the emigrant or prostituted by the tramp of the slave driver? When an oligarchy of 300,000 slaveholders dared to inscribe for the first time in the annals of the word slavery on the banner of armed rebellion, when on the very spots where hardly a century ago the idea of one great democratic republic had first sprung up, whence the first declaration of the rights of man was issued and the first impulse given to the European revolution of the 18th century, when on those very spots counter-revolution, with systematic thoroughness, gloried in rescinding the ideas entertained at the time of the formation of the old Constitution, and maintained, quote, slavery to be a beneficent institution, quote. Indeed, the only solution, they said, of the great problem of the relation of capital to labor, and cynically proclaimed property in man, quote, the cornerstone of the new edifice. Then the working classes of Europe understood at once, even before the fanatic partisanship of the upper classes for the Confederate gentry had given its dismal warning, that the slaveholders' rebellion was to sound the tocsin for a general holy crusade of property against labor, and that for the men of labor, with their hopes for the future, even their past conquests, were at stake in that tremendous conflict on the other side of the Atlantic. Everywhere, therefore, the working people bore patiently the hardships imposed upon them by the cotton crisis, he means the blockade, opposed enthusiastically the pro-slavery intervention, and from most parts of Europe contributed their quota of blood to the good cause. Many of them volunteered and went over and fought, and so on. It's a wonderful thing. The working men of Europe feel sure that, as the American War of Independence initiated a new era of ascendancy for the middle class, so the American anti-slavery war will do for the working classes. They consider it an earnest of the epoch to come that it fell to the lot of Abraham Lincoln to lead the country through the matchless struggle for the rescue of an enchained race and the reconstruction of a social world. The President of the United States replied through the legation to Karl Marx, General Secretary of the First International, thanking him very warmly for his personal commendation and for his support of this great struggle. We here derive new encouragement to persevere from the testimony of the working men of Europe that the national attitude is favored with their enlightened approval and earnest sympathies. Very cordially yours, Abraham Lincoln, President of the United States. I'll tell you a story about that. I'm old enough to have stories about everything. I was once a witness, I'm going to tell you, a hostile witness before McCarthy. And I was trying to explain to McCarthy that the Republican Party was a communist plot. Which is very easy to show. Very easy. And for instance, I said to him that Abraham Lincoln, a consummate politician, owned only one newspaper in his whole life. It was a German language newspaper, which he bought in order to appeal to the emigres from Germany, all of whom were radicals and some of whom were Marxists. That German radicals constituted the decisive vote in the Republican Convention of 1860, which nominated Lincoln, many of whom were Marxists. That Karl Marx wrote anonymously, Senator, to the New York Tribune, the leading newspaper of the Republican Party. And he wrote anonymously a weekly column in the leading Republican newspaper for 12 years. What do you think of that? And he organized this movement to defend the Republican Party in its war against slavery and so on. And he wrote a letter to Karl Marx, to Abraham Lincoln, and Abraham Lincoln wrote a letter to Karl Marx. I had this whole goddamn thing prepared, but I couldn't say it. That's why I told it to you. I have a captive audience. You would not let me say it. But that's what I had planned to say. So, but you see what a case can be made, that the Republican Party was a communist plot. I began to believe it myself. Further questions? Yes.
I wonder if you'll explain your harsh criticism of Styron's book. I remember that it was treated with some enthusiasm and a writer some note that showed you to write this book about it.
It's a stinking book. It falsifies Nat Turner. It makes Nat Turner into a coward when he's about to be executed, which is contrary to contemporary evidence. It falsifies the whole thing. And I wrote a critique of that. I wrote the first critique of that book, which Styron never gave me. Styron had borrowed my master's thesis, from which he got the facts and then distorted them. And I published a book on Nat Turner in 1966, which I had first written in 1936. But nobody in 1936 would publish a book on a crazy Negro